At Silver Mesa Sanctuary, mornings usually started with a kind of hush that only those who lived close to horses would ever understand. It was the sound of hooves shuffling in dewy grass, the gentle sigh of a Mustang nuzzling a water bucket, the distant call of a mockingbird, life in its slow, unhurried rhythm. Carmen Vega had grown to love this peace. It wrapped around her each sunrise, promising a day of healing, hard work, and hope. But that morning, everything changed in a single, violent heartbeat. The sun had barely climbed over the ridge when Trent Callahan arrived, all noise and attitude, as if he wanted to drown out the sanctuary's calm with the rumble of his Harley. Carmen didn't know him, but she could read the type: battered leather, unshaven jaw, anger in every line of his stance. Most people avoided trouble at Silver Mesa. Trent looked like trouble made flesh. He'd barely set foot in the paddock when he started sizing up the horses like he was picking a fight. Carmen was talking quietly with her assistant near the barn when the first shouts broke through the air. "Come on, move it, you dumb animal," Trent bellowed, boots stomping, arms wide and threatening. The Mustang he faced, a proud black gelding called Spirit, flicked his ears back but held his ground. Spirit had come to Silver Mesa after years running wild. He didn't trust easy. Carmen's heart hammered in her chest. She started toward them, her gut warning her something was wrong, but she wasn't fast enough. Trent's anger flashed, one brutal kick to Spirit's side, so hard it echoed off the barn walls. The sound was like a gunshot, a crack in the morning's calm. Horses scattered, kicking up dust. Spirit stumbled, eyes wild, nostrils flaring in shock and pain. Blood welled up where Trent's boot had landed, bright against the Mustang's dark coat. Everything went dead silent. Carmen froze for half a second, then rushed forward, her boots slipping in the mud. "Get away from him!" she snapped, her voice sharper than she'd ever let it be at the sanctuary. Trent just sneered, barely glancing at Spirit's wound. Carmen knelt beside the horse, checking him with trembling hands, her rage growing hotter with every second. Spirit's breath was shallow, his body rigid. Carmen met Trent's eyes with a fury that could have scorched the earth. "That's not just a horse you hurt, that's a soul," Trent scoffed, looking her up and down like she was an obstacle he could ignore. "It's a damn animal. It needs to learn who's boss." He tried to sound tough, but there was a crack in his bravado, a flicker of doubt. Maybe it was the silence from the rest of the staff, or the horror on Carmen's face. Maybe it was Spirit, refusing to look away, holding his ground even as blood dripped down his flank. The other volunteers gathered, drawn by the commotion. Not a word was spoken, but their judgment was heavy in the air. Carmen stood up slowly, dust on her jeans, jaw clenched tight. She pointed to the exit. "You're done here?" she said, voice low and dangerous. But Trent didn't move. Instead, he straightened, meeting Carmen's glare with his own. "What, you gonna call the cops on me? Over a horse?" His words dripped with disdain, but there was something else, an edge of desperation, like a man who'd run out of places to go. Carmen looked at Spirit, at the blood on her hands, then back at Trent. Part of her wanted to scream, to make him pay, to see him thrown out on his ass and never allowed back. But another part, a harder, wiser part, recognized something broken behind his bravado. She took a breath, steadied herself. "You can face a judge," she said coldly, "or you can stay here, work, earn your place back. But you will never lay a hand on one of my horses again." Trent barked a laugh. "You serious? This some kind of hippie rehab?" "Dead serious," Carmen replied, stepping closer so their faces were inches apart. "And if you want to stay out of jail, you'll do every job I give you. No shortcuts, no excuses. You'll earn respect, or you'll leave in cuffs." He studied her, weighing his options. The tension was thick enough to taste: anger, humiliation, something else flickering in Trent's eyes. Around them, the other staff watched in breathless anticipation. Spirit, battered but still standing, locked eyes with Carmen. A silent plea passed between them. Finally, Trent shoved his hands in his pockets and spat on the ground. "Fine. I'll play your game. Can't be harder than a night in county." Carmen didn't smile. "We'll see," she said. Then, Turning to the volunteers, she nodded. "Get Spirit to the vet. The rest of you, back to work." As the staff scattered, Carmen shot one last look at Trent. He looked lost, a man stranded at the crossroads of his own making. She didn't trust him, not yet. But as Spirit limped past, refusing to meet Trent's gaze, Carmen made a promise to herself. She would protect her horses. But maybe, just maybe, she'd help heal a broken man too. The sanctuary's peace had been shattered, but in the stillness that followed, something new took root. A challenge, a reckoning, a chance at redemption neither of them saw coming. Trent woke up the next morning in the tiny trailer that Carmen grudgingly assigned him, barely more than a metal box parked on the far edge of the property. The mattress was thin as cardboard, the walls sweating with morning dew. There was no coffee waiting, no one to greet him. The only sound was the distant nickering of horses, a daily chorus that, today, felt more like a jury than a welcome. For the first time in years, Trent didn't have an escape plan. No bar to run to, no road to disappear down. Carmen's ultimatum played over and over in his head, as relentless as the heat that seeped through the thin, aluminum roof. He tried to brush it off with bravado, but the truth was, jail was no stranger to him. Silver Mesa Sanctuary, though, was a kind of prison he'd never known before, one where his guilt and shame were his cellmates, and the eyes of every horse seemed to pass judgment on him. He stepped outside, stretching the stiffness from his back, and saw Carmen already at work. Hay bales slung over one shoulder, barking orders to the volunteers. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him at all. That stung more than he wanted to admit. "Morning," he muttered, half hoping she wouldn't hear. Carmen didn't miss a beat. "You're late. Tack room, now." He trudged to the tack room, finding a list tacked to the door. His list. It wasn't just chores. It was a gauntlet. 1. Shovel the manure from all the paddocks. 2. Repair the north fence. No shortcuts, no half jobs. 3. Haul fresh water to every trough. 4. Clean the vet shed, inside and out. 5. Wash and organize all grooming tools. The list went on and on. Trent sneered, but there was no one to complain to. The other volunteers watched him with a wary, guarded silence, some exchanging glances as he walked past. He recognized the look. The sanctuary had closed ranks around Carmen and Spirit. He was the outsider, the trespasser, the threat. He grabbed a shovel and headed out, the sun already burning down on his shoulders. Sweat beaded on his brow before he'd finished the first stall. The smell of manure was sharp, unforgiving, but he set his jaw and got to work. There was no music, no cell phone, no banter, just the scrape of the shovel, the occasional snort from a curious horse, and the echo of his own thoughts. He tried to ignore Spirit, who stood at the far end of the paddock, favoring his injured leg. Every time Trent got close, the Mustang tensed, ears pinned flat, eyes wary. The other horses gave him a wide berth, some even trotting away when he entered their space. He felt like a ghost, untouchable and unwelcome. Hours blurred together. By noon, his shirt was soaked through, his muscles burning. Every now and then, Carmen passed by, clipboard in hand, checking his work with the cold precision of a judge. She didn't say much, just a nod if he got it right, a curt, "do it again," if he missed a spot. There was no kindness, no encouragement, just relentless expectation. Lunch came and went. Trent ate alone on a splintered bench outside the barn, 2 bruised apples and a stale granola bar left for him on the porch. The other volunteers shared sandwiches and stories in the shade, laughter floating on the breeze. He watched them, remembering days when he'd had people to eat with, people to trust. Those days felt a lifetime away. He finished hauling water just as the heat hit its peak. The troughs were heavy, the walk long. He nearly slipped once, cursing as water splashed over his boots. But he didn't quit. Pride, the stubborn, battered pride that had landed him here in the first place, kept him moving. He wouldn't give Carmen the satisfaction of seeing him break. Late in the afternoon, he found himself repairing the north fence, sweat dripping into his eyes. The wire was rusted, the posts leaning, but he forced each one upright, tying them off with calloused hands. Carmen appeared, out of nowhere, watching silently from the shade. He felt her eyes on him, measuring, judging, but not mocking. He tried not to care. "Looks better," she said, finally, voice neutral. "Don't let it sag." He didn't reply. He didn't have the energy for another fight. The day dragged on. By evening, Trent's hands were blistered, his back aching. The sky burned orange as the sun set over the mesa. He walked back toward the trailer, ready to collapse, when he heard a soft sound. Spirit, limping near the fence line, head low. Trent stopped, watching the Mustang move with painful caution. Guilt twisted in his gut. He remembered Carmen's words from that morning. "That's not just a horse you hurt, that's a soul." He wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he watched Spirit for a long moment before turning away. As darkness fell, Trent sat alone outside his trailer, looking up at the stars. For the first time, he wondered what it would take to earn forgiveness. From Carmen, from the sanctuary, from Spirit, maybe even from himself. He wasn't sure he deserved it. But as he looked back at the barn, golden light glowing in the windows, he felt the faintest flicker of something unfamiliar. A chance. Not a guarantee, not a promise. Just a chance. Inside the barn, Carmen tended to Spirit's wound, cleaning it with practiced hands. She glanced out the window and saw Trent sitting alone, shoulders hunched, staring into the night. She didn't soften. Not yet. But she made a silent vow. She'd give him the work, the tools, the opportunity to change, whether he took it or not. That was up to him. The sanctuary was quiet, once more. But it wasn't the same peace as before. It was a new stillness, stretched taut with tension and possibility. Justice had been served, not by law, but by labor, humility, and the slow, grinding work of redemption. Tomorrow would bring another list, another test. And somewhere between the chores and the silence, Trent would have to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. Daylight crept over Silver Mesa like a thin sheet of gold, but for Trent, morning was now less a fresh start and more a sentence. Each sunrise reminded him of just how much lay ahead, his body already sore, hands nicked and raw, mind tangled in regret and resentment. He kept telling himself he didn't care about the looks he got from the volunteers, or the way the horses turned away from him. But the truth was, each rejection, every silent accusation, landed heavier than any judge's sentence ever had. Work became his universe. Trent's days blurred together, divided by tasks that Carmen assigned with clinical efficiency. She tracked his progress with a detached eye, offering neither praise nor scorn. If he finished a job well, she marked it off and handed him another. If he missed a detail, she simply pointed, and he fixed it. No questions, no shortcuts. The most grueling part was the endless manure detail. The muck didn't just cling to his boots, it seeped into his skin, a constant physical reminder of his place at the bottom of this strange new world. While other volunteers rotated through easier tasks, feeding, light grooming, even riding, the dirtiest jobs always fell to Trent. Carmen was making a point, and he knew it. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about humility, about showing him where real strength came from. But beneath the surface, something in Trent was beginning to shift. The silence of the sanctuary, which once felt suffocating, started to peel back layers of anger he didn't know he was holding. Each day, he found himself studying the horses, the way they watched him, the way they watched each other. Spirit, especially, became his mirror. The proud black Mustang would stand at the far end of the paddock, refusing to acknowledge Trent's presence. Even the gentlest horses avoided him, as if they could still smell the violence in his veins. At night, when his work was done and the rest of the crew had long gone home, Trent would sit outside the corral. The sky above Silver Mesa was huge, scattered with so many stars that sometimes he felt like he might float away if he stared too long. He watched Spirit graze in the moonlight, the Mustang's outline strong and graceful despite his limp. "How the hell do you say sorry to a horse?" Trent muttered into the darkness. The question sounded ridiculous, even to him, but he couldn't shake it. He remembered how Spirit had looked at him the morning after the kick, not with rage, but with a cold, distant disappointment. It was a look Trent recognized, a look he'd seen from his father, from old friends, from every good person he'd ever pushed away. It stung more than Carmen's silence, more than the bruises on his knuckles or the ache in his back. One evening, after a brutal day patching fence posts in the heat, Trent saw Carmen passing by with a bucket of brushes. She paused, just long enough to acknowledge his presence, then tossed him a grooming brush without a word. He caught it by reflex, staring at the worn handle. For a second, he wanted to throw it back. Wanted to snap that he wasn't some dumb kid to be ordered around. But instead, he just stood there, feeling the weight of the brush in his hand. He walked to the paddock gate, eyes fixed on Spirit. The Mustang eyed him warily, ears twitching, but didn't bolt. Trent stayed on his side of the fence, not daring to step inside. He crouched, brush in hand, and just watched. He didn't say anything. He just waited. Day after day. He kept coming back. Sometimes he'd talk quietly, as if admitting things to Spirit that he couldn't say to any human. Sometimes he just sat, letting the silence fill in the gaps. Other horses started to edge a little closer, curious but still cautious. Spirit kept his distance, but Trent noticed a tiny shift. The Mustang would look at him, just for a second, before turning away. One night, as Trent stared at the bruised sky, Carmen walked by on her way to the barn. She saw him sitting by the fence, brush dangling from his fingers. She paused, considering him, but didn't say a word, just nodded, a small gesture that felt almost like acknowledgement. For a second, Trent thought she might sit with him, might share something, an encouragement, a warning, anything. But she moved on, leaving him with the horses and his thoughts. The days dragged on, each one a little different than the last. Sometimes Trent slipped, snapping at a volunteer, working carelessly when his temper flared. But each time, Carmen held him accountable, making him redo the work until it was right. No one here let him off the hook, and slowly, grudgingly, he started to understand why. It was Carmen's unspoken rule: respect had to be earned, not demanded. No one here feared him, but no one pitied him either. They just expected him to show up, to do the work, to change. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional grind. Trust, he realized, was a fragile thing, hard to win, easy to break. It wasn't just Spirit's trust he'd lost, but the trust of the entire sanctuary. And for once in his life, Trent found himself wanting it back, not out of pride, but out of a strange, aching need to prove he could be better. One blistering afternoon, as he hauled buckets of water along the fence line, Trent caught Spirit watching him. The Mustang's head was high, ears pricked forward. Trent paused, meeting the horse's gaze. For a heartbeat, the whole world stilled. Then Spirit turned away, trotting to the far end of the paddock. But this time, he didn't limp as badly. And this time, he didn't look quite so afraid. That night, as Trent scrubbed the last bits of mud from his hands, Carmen walked by again. She didn't stop, didn't speak, but she left a second brush on the fence post next to him. Trent stared at it for a long time, then picked it up, feeling something shift deep inside him, a spark of hope, so small it scared him. He sat outside long after the sanctuary had gone to sleep, listening to the slow, steady breath of the horses. For the first time since arriving, Trent didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like a man at the beginning of something new. The pain of earning back trust was real, and it was hard. But as the stars flickered overhead, Trent realized maybe, just maybe, it was worth every blister, every silent night, every ounce of humility. The desert dawn came slowly, painting Silver Mesa Sanctuary in subtle strokes of pink and gold. The air was cool and sharp, carrying the smell of dew and distant sage. For once, Trent found himself awake before the sun had truly risen, standing outside his trailer with a battered thermos of black coffee. The early silence was different now, a little less hostile, a little more like a clean slate. He watched the Mustangs graze in the half-light, their bodies shadows among the pale grasses. Spirit stood apart, as always, head held high and alert, but something about his posture looked less guarded. Trent sipped his coffee, feeling the old ache in his hands, the dull soreness that never quite faded anymore. But he didn't mind. In fact, he was beginning to crave it. The sense that he'd actually worked for something, even if it was just a patch of clean stall or a fixed length of fence. Carmen was already moving, as always, feeding, checking hooves, never pausing. She caught his eye briefly and gave a small nod, the barest sign that she'd noticed his early start. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't nothing, and Trent tucked it away for later. By the time he'd finished his chores, scrubbing water troughs, stacking hay, sweeping the barn aisles, the sun was fully up and the sanctuary had come to life. Volunteers greeted each other with smiles and easy laughter, but their voices dropped when Trent passed by. He felt the old shame flicker, but it didn't sting quite so deep. He knew why they kept their distance, and these days he couldn't blame them. But today, something was different in the air. As he rounded the corral with an armful of clean brushes, he saw Spirit standing at the far fence, grazing quietly. The horse's limp was nearly gone, though he still favored his right side. Trent hesitated, brushes in hand, the memory of his violence never far from his mind. He approached slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves. Spirit's ears flicked back, but he didn't bolt. Trent stopped a few feet away, keeping the fence between them. The quiet was thick. Every sound, every heartbeat seemed amplified. Trent remembered Carmen's words. "That's not just a horse you hurt, that's a soul." He cleared his throat. "Hey, buddy," he said, voice low and uncertain. "I know I'm the last guy you want to hear from, but I'm sorry, I really am." His words hung in the air, as fragile as the morning light. Spirit didn't move. He kept chewing, eyes fixed on a spot in the distance. But he didn't turn away. That, for Trent, felt monumental. The ritual became daily. Each morning, after finishing his chores, Trent would approach Spirit's fence. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he just stood quietly, letting his presence announce itself without demand. The other horses watched, curious. One or two even wandered closer, snuffling at his pockets for treats. Trent found himself smiling, almost in spite of himself. Carmen watched from a distance, careful never to intrude. She noticed the way Trent moved now, slower, softer, shoulders less tight. She saw the way Spirit began to relax, inch by inch, the wall between man and Mustang shifting, if only a little. It was Carmen who gave Trent his next test. One crisp morning, she handed him a halter and a lead rope. "Try with Rosie," she said, nodding toward a gentle gray mare. "She's forgiving, but she's no pushover. If you rush her, she'll let you know." Trent took the halter, feeling the weight of trust in his palm. He approached Rosie as he'd learned to with Spirit, slow, open, talking quietly. Rosie's eyes were soft, but she didn't come right away. Trent waited, patient, letting her close the gap on her terms. When she finally dipped her head, he slipped the halter on, careful and gentle. Carmen nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, walk her around the paddock. Slow, easy. Pay attention." He did, as told, focusing on every movement, every shift of Rosie's body. She tested him, stopping short, backing up, but he didn't pull or force her. Instead, he waited her out, letting her decide when to move. By the time they'd made 2 slow laps, Rosie was walking beside him, head low, relaxed. When he handed the lead rope back to Carmen, she looked him dead in the eye. That's how you start to earn trust. Not just with horses, with people too. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. The lesson stung, but not in a bad way. More like the ache after a bone finally starts to heal. That evening, after the last chores were finished and the sun dipped low, Trent made his way back to Spirit's fence. He found the Mustang already waiting, ears pricked forward. This time, when Trent stopped a few feet away, Spirit didn't shy or look away. He simply stood, breathing slow and steady. For the first time, Trent let himself really talk, voice barely above a whisper. I screwed up. You know? Not just with you, with a lot of things. He looked down, scuffing his boot in the dirt. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know I'm trying. There was a long pause. A bird called somewhere out in the dusk. And then, to Trent's shock, Spirit took a tentative step forward. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that Trent could feel the heat of his breath. He stayed there, unmoving, for several minutes, afraid to break the spell. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was the first crack in the wall, a sign that maybe, if he kept showing up, kept doing the work, something new could grow in that space between them. Carmen watched from behind a stack of hay, careful to remain unseen. Her eyes glistened, not with pride exactly, but with a hard-won hope. She knew better than anyone how long the road to trust could be, how easy it was to break, and how slow it was to mend. But she also knew redemption when she saw it, no matter how fragile. As the stars came out, Trent lingered by the fence, feeling the weight of the day in his bones and something lighter in his chest. For the first time in a long time, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could change, and his spirit watched him under the wide, forgiving sky. The man and the Mustang began, in their own quiet ways, to heal. The heat had been building for days. By late afternoon, the sky above Silver Mesa Sanctuary was a washed-out gray, heavy with the threat of something ominous. Dust devils chased each other along the fence lines. Even the horses seemed restless, their ears flicking nervously, their bodies tense as if sensing danger before it arrived. Trent was stacking hay in the open shed when he smelled the first whiff of smoke. It was faint at first, barely cutting through the scent of sun-baked earth and horse sweat. But with every breath, the smoke grew stronger, until it pressed at the back of his throat and stung his eyes. He looked up and saw a thin thread of darkness twisting up over the ridge, out beyond the canyon, too close for comfort. He dropped the bale and sprinted toward the barn, heart hammering in his chest. By the time he reached the main yard, Carmen was already at her truck, radio clutched in one hand, her face taut with focus. The other volunteers were clustered around her, eyes wide with fear. "There's a wildfire west of the canyon," she said, voice steady but tight. "We're not under direct threat yet, but if the wind shifts—" Before she could finish, the radio crackled. A neighbor's frantic voice came through, words tumbling over each other. "We need help. Horses trapped. Barns filling with smoke. Carmen, please." Carmen's eyes flashed. She turned to her team. "I have to go help the Thompsons evacuate. It's their old barn, the one near the creek. Keep the sanctuary horses calm. If the wind changes, get everyone to the south pasture. Gate stays open, but lock the road." Trent stepped forward, adrenaline roaring in his veins. "What do you want me to do?" Carmen didn't hesitate. "Stay here, watch the herd, don't try to play hero, just keep them safe." And then she was gone, truck tires spinning, dust billowing in her wake. The sky was darker now, a strange, eerie orange leaking into the clouds. The wind carried ash, light as snow, settling on Trent's shoulders and the horses' coats. Some of the animals began to whinny, hooves pawing the ground in growing panic. The other volunteers fanned out, trying to soothe them, but the tension was thick, like the sanctuary itself was holding its breath. Trent moved from paddock to paddock, checking latches, making sure the gates could swing open if they had to make a quick escape. Spirit was in the back pasture, pacing along the fence line, nostrils flaring. The big Mustang stopped and stared at Trent, as if demanding answers he didn't have. A sudden gust swept through the canyon, carrying with it a cloud of choking smoke. The horses erupted, eyes rolling, some rearing, others trying to bolt. A chorus of frightened cries filled the air. Trent's instincts screamed at him to run, to leave the chaos behind, save himself. But something deeper held him rooted. Carmen's trust, Spirit's wary hope, his own desperate need to prove he wasn't the same man who'd once lashed out in anger. He sprinted to the north paddock, where a group of younger horses had crowded against the fence, eyes wild with fear. One of the volunteers, a college kid named Jesse, was frozen, back pressed to the wood as a chestnut gelding tried to climb over him. "Move!" Trent shouted, grabbing Jesse's arm and pulling him clear. Open the side gate. Let them out if you have to. Jesse nodded, pale but focused now. Trent jumped the fence and got between the panicked horses and the far gate, arms wide. Easy. Easy now. He talked to them the way Carmen had talked to Spirit, voice low and steady, hiding the panic in his own chest. You're okay. You're safe. I got you. As he worked, the wind shifted again. Now smoke billowed straight into the sanctuary. He heard a crash from the paddock behind him, the one where Spirit was penned. The big Mustang was kicking the gate, eyes wild, desperate to escape. The other horses around him were whinnying, some bucking, the chaos growing. Trent's mind raced. If he let them all go at once, they'd stampede, maybe injure themselves. But if he waited, the smoke would get worse. He thought of Carmen, of her last words. Don't try to play hero. But there was no one else. And if he did nothing, horses could die. He made his decision in a heartbeat. He ran to Spirit's paddock, yanking the emergency latch free. The Mustang burst out, nearly colliding with him, but Trent stood his ground. Easy, boy. Over here. He called to the other horses, waving his arms, trying to herd them toward the south ridge, the safest spot if the flames jumped the creek. Spirit hesitated, looking at Trent with a mix of fear and something like trust. Trent lowered his voice, locking eyes with the Mustang. You know the way, don't you? Take them out. Spirit snorted, then turned, leading the herd in a mad dash down the open path. Trent sprinted behind, waving and shouting, trying to keep the stragglers moving. Jesse and the other volunteers joined in, shoving gates open, calling to the animals. Ash rained down, stinging their eyes, choking their throats. For a terrifying moment, a young mare slipped and went down hard. Trent threw himself to her side, grabbing her halter, whispering frantic encouragement until she struggled back to her feet. He pushed her forward, never letting go until she was running with the others. Smoke followed them all the way to the canyon ridge. From there, they could see the orange line of fire creeping along the horizon, a monstrous thing made of heat and hunger. Trent stood with the horses, chest heaving, legs shaking. Spirit stayed close, head high, his coat streaked with ash. Trent reached out, almost without thinking, and let his hand rest gently on Spirit's neck. The Mustang didn't flinch. Long minutes passed, the herd huddled together, volunteers coughing and wiping their eyes. Finally, Carmen's truck returned, battered but intact. She jumped out, scanning the pasture, and when she saw the herd, all safe, she ran to Trent. What happened? She demanded, voice hoarse with worry. Trent wiped soot from his face. Wind changed. Smoke came in fast. We got them out. Spirit led the way. Carmen looked at the Mustang, then at Trent. Her eyes glistened with relief and something more. Respect. She squeezed his arm. You saved them? She whispered. He shook his head, too exhausted to claim any heroics. We all did. Him, most of all. He nodded toward Spirit. Carmen looked at Spirit, then back at Trent. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a fragile but undeniable shift. For the first time since he'd arrived, Trent felt not just tolerated, but truly accepted. The fire burned all night, but it never crossed the sanctuary fence. By dawn, the sky was clear, the air sweet with rain and smoke. Silver Mesa had survived. And so, in some small but undeniable way, had Trent. The wildfire's scars lingered long after the last embers died. At Silver Mesa, the grass along the fence line was blackened and brittle, and the smell of ash clung to everything: barnwood, tack, even the horses' manes. Life at the sanctuary gradually returned to its rhythm, but everyone walked a little softer, as if they'd been reminded how quickly peace could be lost. For Trent, something fundamental had shifted. He felt it every time he stepped into the pasture, every time Carmen or the volunteers looked at him with something other than suspicion. The memory of the fire, the adrenaline, and that wild, desperate dash to save the herd replayed in his mind at night. Sometimes he'd wake with his heart pounding, half expecting the sky to glow orange again. But the memory that clung to him most was not of flames or panic. It was of Spirit, racing ahead, leading the others, and stopping to let Trent rest his hand on his neck, even as the world seemed to burn. In the days after the fire, work on the sanctuary changed from routine to recovery. The north trough was cracked from the heat and needed repairs. Fence lines had to be checked for damage. The barn needed a deep clean. Everywhere Trent turned, there was soot or debris to clear away. But for once, he didn't mind. Each chore felt like rebuilding not just the land, but something inside himself. It was during one of these quiet mornings, while Trent was fixing a splintered trough, that Spirit approached. The Mustang had been distant since the fire, watchful but unapproachable. Like he was still deciding whether Trent could be trusted after everything. Trent noticed him out of the corner of his eye, a shadow moving across the burnt grass. He kept his hands busy, careful not to look directly at Spirit, not wanting to break the spell. Spirit paused a few feet away, sniffing the air. Trent's heart thudded. The silence was so heavy that Trent could hear the distant hum of insects in the grass. Then, slowly, Spirit stepped closer. One hoof, then another, until the space between them was no more than an arm's length. Trent swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He remembered what Carmen had always said about horses. They could sense what you carried inside: anger, fear, shame. He let his hands fall to his sides, open, inviting but not demanding. Spirit's nostrils flared, his ears flicking back and forth. Then, to Trent's shock, the Mustang reached out and nudged his shoulder, gentle, almost playful. Trent froze, afraid to breathe. Spirit's touch was so light that for a moment Trent wondered if he'd imagined it. But the horse didn't pull away. He waited, patient, as if telling Trent that the next move was his to make. With trembling fingers, Trent reached up and let his hand rest on Spirit's mane. He moved slowly, barely brushing the coarse black hair. Spirit shivered, but didn't step away. The trust in that moment was fragile, but unmistakable. A crack in the wall that had separated them for so long. Carmen saw it from a distance. She'd come out to check on the pasture, carrying her morning coffee, and stopped in her tracks when she spotted Trent and Spirit together. For a moment she simply watched, a lump in her throat and something bright stinging her eyes. She didn't dare speak, didn't want to break the fragile peace. So she stayed hidden behind the hay shed, her heart swelling with hope. Trent gently ran the brush through Spirit's mane, working out the tangles left from days of ash and dust. With each stroke, Spirit relaxed a little more, his eyes half closing. The other horses watched from a distance, curiosity overcoming caution, as if sensing the change. For Trent, the world seemed to shrink to just that patch of earth, that horse, and the steady rhythm of the brush. He didn't try to talk, didn't apologize again. He'd learned that words could only go so far. It was his actions that mattered now, his patience, his willingness to show up day after day, no matter how long it took. He worked in silence, lost in the moment. He remembered the first day, the violence, the anger, the shame. He remembered Carmen's cold, steady voice. That's not just a horse you hurt, that's a soul. He wondered if this, finally, was what forgiveness felt like. Not a grand gesture, but a quiet acceptance. A space made for healing. When Spirit finally pulled away, he didn't bolt. He just gave Trent a long, searching look, deep and ancient and wise. Trent let out a shaky breath, feeling tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He wiped them away quickly, glancing around to make sure no one saw. But Carmen saw, and she smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened the lines of her face. She knew how hard it was, for man and Mustang alike, to lower their guard. She didn't interrupt, but later, when she passed Trent by the barn, she handed him a fresh brush, without a word. He understood what it meant. Keep going. You're doing it right. The days that followed were lighter, somehow. Spirit didn't seek Trent out, but he didn't avoid him, either. When Trent entered the paddock, the horses stayed put, watching with cautious eyes but no longer skittish. The volunteers began to treat Trent differently, too, offering small smiles, sharing cold drinks after a long shift, even asking his advice on fence repair or feeding schedules. The wall between Trent and the world grew thinner, almost invisible. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky caught fire with color, Trent found himself leaning against the fence, watching Spirit graze. Carmen joined him, hands tucked in her back pockets, silent for a long moment. "You know," she said finally, "it's not about being perfect. It's about showing up. Every day." Trent nodded, understanding. He didn't need to say anything. Spirit, standing nearby, was proof enough of what could happen when you stopped running from your own mistakes and started making amends. That night, as Trent lay on the thin mattress in his trailer, he stared at the ceiling and felt something settle in his chest. A quiet, unsteady hope. He'd been given a chance, not just by Carmen or by the sanctuary, but by Spirit himself. And he intended to honor it, one day at a time. For the first time in years, Trent fell asleep without the weight of anger or regret pressing him down. Instead, he dreamed of wild horses running through fields of green and the feeling of a Mustang's breath warm against his hand. At Silver Mesa, the wall had finally broken, not with a shout, but with a gentle nudge, a slow forgiveness, and the steady work of healing day after day. It was late Friday afternoon when Carmen surprised Trent by tossing a set of truck keys his way. "We're running low on supplies. Feed, salt blocks, a couple things for the tack room. You're coming with me," she said, her tone casual but firm. Trent caught the keys, surprised by the trust. For weeks now, he'd stayed inside the sanctuary's boundaries, focused on the day-to-day grind, rarely thinking about the world beyond the dusty fence line. The idea of heading into town, of facing people, noise, the unknown, brought a flicker of old anxiety. Still, he nodded, brushing his hands on his jeans and following Carmen to the truck. They drove in silence for a while, windows down, the breeze carrying the scents of sage and smoke. Out here, the scars of the wildfire still showed, blackened hillsides, burnt fence posts, a sky that felt both too wide and too close. Carmen kept her eyes on the road, but every so often she glanced Trent's way, measuring him in that quiet, searching way of hers. He wondered what she saw. Not the man who'd first arrived, full of rage and arrogance, but someone different. Someone still flawed, still figuring it out, but trying, really trying, to be better. Town was little more than a main street lined with a feed store, a diner, a mechanic, and, as always in these places, a bar. The feed store was first. They loaded bags of grain, salt blocks, and a new set of hoof picks. Carmen chatted easily with the store owner, introducing Trent with a simple, "He's with me." The owner looked him over, but nodded, handing over a couple of the free apples for the black Mustang. With the supplies stowed in the truck bed, Carmen checked her watch. "We've got time before the hardware store closes. I'm starving. Let's get a bite." She didn't wait for a reply, just strode across the street toward the bar. Inside, the air was cool and thick with the scent of spilled beer and fried onions. The place was half full, ranch hands, a few regulars, the sort of people who could spot an outsider from 100 yards. Trent felt their eyes follow him and Carmen as they took seats at a corner table. Carmen ordered a burger and a Coke. Trent, not trusting himself around alcohol, stuck with iced tea. For a few minutes, they ate in companionable silence. Carmen was halfway through her burger when the bar door banged open. A tall man in a sweat-stained ball cap strode in, followed by a couple of cronies. He spotted Carmen, then Trent, and his expression twisted. "Well, well, if it ain't the horse lady and her new project." His voice was loud, rough-edged, designed to carry. A few heads turned. Someone snickered. Trent tensed, shoulders tightening, jaw clenching on instinct. Carmen didn't flinch. She looked up, calm as stone. "Afternoon, Rick." Rick ignored her and focused on Trent. "Heard you got yourself a real winner out at the sanctuary. Guy's got a record longer than my arm. Hell, I heard he nearly killed a horse." The words cut through the room, sharp and cold. For a moment, all the noise faded. Trent felt his face flush, old shame prickling at his skin. He expected Carmen to jump to his defense, to say something that would put Rick in his place, but she stayed silent, eyes on Trent, letting him decide how to answer. The old Trent would have met words with fists, anger for anger, pain for pain. The new Trent, still raw but learning, breathed deep, searching for something steadier inside himself. He stood up, pushing his chair back slowly. The room watched, waiting for trouble. Trent's voice, when it came, was rough but steady. "You're right, Rick. I did some things I'm not proud of. Hurt a horse, hurt a lot of people. I won't make excuses, but I'm not that man anymore. Not if I can help it." A hush fell over the table. Rick blinked, caught off guard. Trent went on, voice soft but carrying. "I'm working for Carmen because she gave me a chance, one I didn't deserve. And that horse? Spirit? He's the reason I'm still here, still trying. If you want to judge me, that's fine. But you ought to know, every day I get up and try to do better. That's all any of us can do." Rick opened his mouth, a comeback forming, but Carmen cut him off, her voice cool as Riverstone. "He's working harder than most. Leave it be." Rick sneered, but the fire in him had cooled. He looked away, muttering, and drifted back to his friends, the moment already fading. Trent sat down, his hands shaking a little. Carmen slid his tea toward him. "You handled that well," she said quietly. He shrugged. Didn't feel like it. It was honest. Sometimes that's harder than any fight. Trent studied his hands, calloused and scarred. "I used to think strength was about never backing down, always being in control." Carmen finished her burger, her gaze thoughtful. That's what a lot of people think, until life teaches them different. For the rest of the meal, the tension ebbed. A couple of regulars even nodded Trent's way. By the time they left, the sky outside was streaked with red, the evening wind softer now. Driving back, Carmen was quiet for a long stretch. Finally, she spoke. "You did good tonight. Not just for you, for Spirit, for the sanctuary, for all of us." Trent looked out at the darkening fields, feeling something settle inside him. "I hope so." As they turned up the dirt road toward Silver Mesa, the stars came out, sharp and clear. The sanctuary lights glowed in the distance, a beacon in the dark. Trent realized then that his hardest battles weren't with the world outside, but with himself. The old anger, the shame, the fear of never being enough. But every day, every hard moment faced and not run from, was one more step towards the man he wanted to be. And in that quiet drive home, with Carmen at the wheel and the desert stretching endless and open around them, Trent let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible. Not because someone handed it to him, but because he was willing to fight for it, one honest day at a time. The week after the bar incident, everything at Silver Mesa seemed a little brighter, a little lighter. The air was still sharp with the scent of scorched earth, but grass was beginning to poke through the black patches along the north fence. The horses, too, seemed more at ease. Some days Trent would catch Spirit standing near the others, basking in the early sun, watching him with those deep, unreadable eyes. But for Trent, time felt suddenly precious. His hands remembered the work, the chores, the fence mending, the sweat and ache and rhythm of this place. But now each task felt final, like a farewell written in small acts. His 90 days at the sanctuary were almost up. He'd served Carmen's sentence, paid off his debt with sweat and humility, but a part of him dreaded the thought of leaving more than he'd ever feared jail or the open road. On his last morning, he woke before dawn, unable to sleep. The sky outside his trailer was painted in pale streaks of blue and orange, promising another hot day. Trent lingered for a moment at the window, watching the Mustangs graze in the far pasture. For a moment, he let himself remember who he'd been when he arrived. Angry, alone, convinced that the world owed him nothing but a fight. He moved through his chores slowly, savoring every step. Fresh water for the troughs, a careful hand with Rosie the gray mare's hooves, quiet greetings to the other horses. Each of the volunteers stopped to say goodbye, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with a smile. Jesse, the youngest, handed him a battered ball cap embroidered with the sanctuary's logo. "Keep it," he said, blushing. "You earned it, man." Carmen was waiting for him by the barn when he finished. She didn't have a speech prepared, never did. But her eyes were softer than usual, her stance a little less guarded. "Paperwork's done," she said, offering him a manila envelope. You're free to go. No more strings. Trent took the envelope, feeling the weight of it. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. Carmen hesitated, then stepped forward and held out her hand. Trent shook it, and for a long second, neither let go. "Thank you," he managed finally. Carmen's mouth twitched. "Don't thank me. You did the work." A silence hung between them, gentle, not awkward. Then Carmen cleared her throat. "You ought to say goodbye to him," she said, jerking her chin toward the north paddock. Trent hesitated, suddenly nervous, and then made his way to the fence. Spirit was there, standing beneath the lone cottonwood tree. The black Mustang was still, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Trent stopped a few feet away. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, voice thick. "I guess this is it. I know I wasn't much when I got here. I was angry at the world, angry at myself, mostly. You showed me something different." He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out the old grooming brush Carmen had tossed him on that first week. He held it up, smiling. "I tried to be better because you gave me a reason to try, because you never gave up, even when I did." Spirit stepped closer, slow and deliberate. The two stood in the shade, silence stretching between them. Then, in a gesture so gentle it nearly broke Trent's heart, Spirit lowered his head and nuzzled Trent's shoulder. The pressure was real, warm, and insistent, an unmistakable sign of trust. Trent closed his eyes, letting the moment sink in. It felt like forgiveness, like a blessing. He reached up, resting his hand on Spirit's strong neck. For a long minute, neither moved. Trent thought about everything he wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he whispered, "Thanks for not giving up on me, when I gave you every reason to." Carmen watched from a distance, arms folded across her chest. She could see Trent's shoulders shaking, just a little, just enough to know how much the goodbye meant. She blinked back, a sudden sting in her eyes, pride and sorrow tangled together. As Trent walked away, Spirit followed him to the edge of the paddock, stopping only when the fence made it impossible to go further. The Mustang watched as Trent loaded his single duffel bag into the back of the old truck Carmen had arranged for him to borrow. For a second, Trent considered turning back, staying just one more day. But he knew this was how it had to be. Carmen handed him the keys. "You got a plan?" He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Gonna try to find work. Maybe at one of the dog rescues east of here. Figured I'd see if I could help out. Do something good." She smiled, her approval quiet but unmistakable. "You'll do fine. You know where we are, if you need a hand." The engine coughed and sputtered, but finally caught. Trent rolled down the window, waving to the crew gathered by the barn. "Thank you," he called, his voice stronger now, "for everything." As the truck rumbled down the dirt drive, Trent glanced in the rearview mirror. Spirit still stood at the paddock fence, a dark silhouette against the morning sun, watching him go. For a while, Trent drove in silence, the sanctuary fading behind him. He thought about the man who'd first walked onto that land, furious, arrogant, lost. He thought about Carmen's strength, the volunteer's patience, and most of all, the unwavering spirit of a Mustang who'd taught him what it meant to earn trust, not demand it. At the crossroads outside of town, Trent pulled over. He sat for a long time, engine idling, head bowed. Then he reached into the glove box and pulled out a sheet of paper, the start of a letter, words clumsy, but honest. He wrote to Carmen, to Spirit, to everyone at Silver Mesa. "I'm volunteering at a dog rescue now. I'm starting over. I'm using what you taught me, every day, even when it's hard. Thank you for not turning your back on me when I deserved it most." He folded the letter, tucked it into an envelope, and addressed it to the sanctuary. Then, with a deep breath, he started the truck and headed towards whatever came next, carrying with him the lessons of Silver Mesa, the weight of Spirit's forgiveness, and the quiet hope that, even after goodbye, some ties are never truly broken. And in the pale, endless morning, with the world opening up before him, Trent finally felt free, not because he'd left the sanctuary, but because a piece of it would always be with him. The days after Trent's departure passed slowly at Silver Mesa. There was no dramatic change in the routine. Horses still needed feeding, fences mending, and pastures cleaned. Yet Carmen felt the difference in subtle ways, in the hush that lingered by the north paddock, in the empty cot at the back of the staff trailer, in the way Spirit now watched the gate, as if expecting a friend. Carmen had seen many people come and go over her years at the sanctuary. Some arrived hopeful and eager, some broken and angry, most leaving with a little more of themselves healed than when they arrived. But Trent's story stayed with her, heavy and bright, impossible to shake. One evening, after a long day spent repairing a fence line scorched by the wildfire, Carmen sat on the back steps of the barn, a mug of strong coffee cradled in her hands. The desert sun faded to gold, painting the sky in streaks of amber and rose. She watched Spirit graze alone, the Mustang's black coat gleaming in the last light. In that soft dusk, Carmen let her thoughts drift back over the past months. She remembered the morning Trent first arrived, the fury in his eyes, the chip on his shoulder, the way he'd stormed into the paddock as if to prove something to the world. She remembered the sound of that kick, the sharp pain in Spirit's cry, and her own anger, an anger rooted in love and the need to protect. But more than the pain, she remembered what came after. The hard work, the sweat and frustration, the long silent nights when Trent sat outside the fence, wrestling with himself more than any horse. Carmen had seen that kind of struggle before, both in people and animals. The slow battle to overcome what you'd done and what had been done to you. She'd learned that some wounds couldn't be healed with bandages or soft words, but only with time, humility, and a willingness to change. He came in thinking strength was about control, she thought, echoing her own voice from many nights spent recounting stories to herself that horses existed to obey. But Spirit showed him real strength is earning trust you once broke. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was an email from a neighboring rescue, someone asking if Carmen knew anything about a volunteer named Trent Callahan, if she could vouch for his character. Carmen smiled to herself, picturing Trent knee-deep in muddy paw prints, trying to corral a pack of rescue dogs. She replied without hesitation, "Trent is one of the hardest workers we've ever had. He's earned every ounce of trust and respect we could give. Give him a chance. You won't regret it." As she hit send, Carmen felt a wave of emotion, part pride, part relief. She realized that her job, more than anything, was to create space for change. To hold the line when someone crossed it, yes, but also to build a bridge back when they were ready to return. Leadership wasn't about dominance or power. It was about boundaries, wisdom, and faith in the possibility of redemption. Later that week, a letter arrived at Silver Mesa. It was addressed to the sanctuary, written in Trent's careful, blocky hand. Carmen gathered the staff and volunteers after dinner, opening it in the warm light of the barn. "I'm volunteering at a dog rescue. Starting over, using what you taught me. Every day, I remember Spirit, and the chance you gave me to be someone better. I won't forget it." Carmen's voice wavered as she read, her throat tight. She folded the letter and slipped it into her jacket pocket, carrying it with her for days, an anchor and a reminder. Sitting by the paddock that night, she found Spirit standing beside her, close enough to feel his breath on her shoulder. She reached up, rubbing his neck, and let herself speak softly into the dusk. "You did more than heal, old friend. You taught us all that trust can be rebuilt, even when it's shattered. You showed me what patience looks like and what forgiveness really means." In her mind, Carmen spoke not just to Spirit, but to everyone who'd ever lost their way, to anyone who'd ever wondered if they could come back from a mistake. She knew the world was full of people like Trent, burdened by regret, hungry for a second chance. She wished they could all stand here, beneath this wide desert sky, and feel the quiet power of forgiveness. Not every scar had to end in pain, she realized. Some could become doors to something new. Evidence not of weakness, but of survival and growth. The ones who'd been hurt the most, like Spirit, were often the ones who held the most grace. And those who dared to face what they'd broken, who worked every day to be better, could sometimes find their way home again. Before heading inside, Carmen stood for a long time, hand resting on Spirit's withers, watching the stars appear. She thought of all the stories she'd seen unfold here, of loss and hope, anger and healing, endings that became beginnings, and she silently thanked Trent for reminding her that, as long as there were people willing to try, there would always be a way back. In the morning, she would pin his letter to the barn wall, where everyone could see it, a reminder to herself, to her staff, to every future Trent who might walk through her gate, that redemption isn't a gift handed down, but something earned, one honest day at a time. Sometimes the stories that linger with us are not those of loud victories or easy forgiveness, but the quiet, complicated journeys where someone chooses to change, where the real victory is simply not giving up. In the aftermath of Trent's departure, Silver Mesa Sanctuary returned to its daily rhythms, but something fundamental had shifted, not only for Trent or Carmen, but for everyone who had watched their story unfold. As the season rolled forward, wildflowers crept back along the fire-blackened ridge, small blossoms breaking through scorched earth. Life at the sanctuary was much the same, early mornings with the scent of hay and dust, evenings spent in the cool hush of the barn. But there was a new thread of hope woven into the routine. Carmen felt it in the way her volunteers greeted each day. A little more open, a little more willing to believe that change was possible, even for those who seemed most lost. Carmen often found herself reflecting on what had happened. She thought about Trent, about the battered pride he carried in his first days, and the shame he'd tried so hard to bury. She remembered the violence, the way his anger had erupted, the crack of a boot against Spirit's side, and the urge she'd felt to send him away, forever. But she also remembered the moments of humility, Trent's silent labor in the heat, the patience in his eyes as he sat beside Spirit's fence, the nights he spent asking for forgiveness without words. She understood in the end that the story's power didn't lie in some sudden transformation, but in the slow, relentless work of becoming someone better. Redemption, she'd come to see, isn't a single moment. It's not something that can be bought with a single act or an eloquent apology. It is a journey, a series of choices made day after day, even when no one is watching, even when you're not sure you can forgive yourself. Trent hadn't just said he was sorry. He'd shown it. He'd worked, failed, tried again, and kept showing up, earning back trust with every calloused hand and every act of care. Spirit, too, became a symbol at Silver Mesa. Of all the creatures and people who have been hurt, but still offer grace, his quiet strength reminded Carmen, her team, and the sanctuary's visitors that trust, once broken, isn't rebuilt overnight. It takes time, patience, and a willingness to risk hurt again. But it is possible. Spirit's story was proof that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that those who have suffered can lead the way for others. Carmen took to telling the story to new volunteers. She'd gather them by the paddock, point out Spirit grazing in the sun, and say, "That Mustang taught a lot of us about forgiveness. He doesn't forget what happened, but he chooses, every day, to let someone new get close, not because it's easy, but because it's worth it." She'd talk about Trent, too, not as a villain or a victim, but as a man who chose to do the hard work of facing his past. She would say, "Sometimes we're the ones who cause harm. Sometimes we're the ones who need a second chance. What matters isn't where you've been, but what you're willing to do now." The deeper message of Trent and Spirit's story wasn't just about forgiveness or change. It was about humility. The humility to accept that you've failed, to ask for help, and to keep showing up even when it feels impossible. It was about the courage to let others in, to risk being hurt again, to believe that you can become someone worthy of trust. Redemption isn't a gift handed out freely, Carmen realized. It's earned, sometimes slowly, sometimes painfully, but always through action. Trent's journey was a reminder that no one is beyond hope, and that sometimes the most broken people are the ones who can teach us the most about grace, patience, and the true meaning of strength. Weeks after Trent left, the sanctuary received another letter. This time, it was addressed to the volunteers and to Spirit himself. "Dear Silver Mesa, I'm still working at the dog rescue. Every day, I think about what you taught me. Some days are harder than others. There are moments when I want to quit, when I wonder if I'm really different. But then I remember Spirit and the way he looked at me that last morning. I remember that trust is something you earn, not something you demand. I hope I'm making you proud. Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Carmen pinned the letter next to the first, beneath a photograph of Spirit. It became a kind of touchstone, a reminder for everyone who passed through the sanctuary's gates that healing was possible. That second chances were real, but never easy. For those listening to this story, Carmen would offer a final reflection. Have you ever been given a second chance? What did you do with it? Would you recognize it if it came in the form of a black horse with quiet eyes, or the outstretched hand of someone willing to trust you again? Redemption, she would say, is not about erasing the past, but about building a better future with the tools you have. It is about showing up, day after day, and choosing to be the person you hope to become. And so, as the sun set over Silver Mesa and Spirit grazed peacefully in the fading light, Carmen believed, truly believed, that every scar, every mistake, every hard-won moment of grace could become the doorway to the life you were meant to live. If this story touched your heart, remember, not every scar needs to end in pain. Sometimes it becomes the doorway to who you were meant to be. Please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, somewhere, someone is waiting to offer you a second chance, or to receive one from you.